So this armor piece was introduced in 2007, as was this armor piece. And when you look at them at first glance, they look identical to each other. No, clearly they don't. They're a mirror image of each other. They're very interesting pieces, very obscure pieces, and interestingly enough, really only have one connection point. But I will do a further exploration of these pieces in another video. That's not the point of this video, though. These are a left and right pair of armor pieces introduced on the new Matoro Mahri set. But interestingly, they're not the only one. These are the same piece. They look identical. But these, would you believe if I told you, are a left and right pair? There's a very subtle asymmetry to this piece that's not visible on the front, but rather on the back. Where the mold mark is on that front side, there's a little Pepsi logo right there. Look at that. But they're left and right mirrored. Why is that? I always find this fascinating, how some little pieces have obscure things about them that make them maybe asymmetric or just a little off, a little unusual. This is something we explored with the Terex weapon in a previous video I talked about, and it's obviously not the only piece. I mean, we have an example of for us right in front of us, but this goes further, and it's something that can actually be traced back all the way to 2001. This piece here was introduced for the McDonald's Matoro. It was used on several other sets, both in Bionicle and elsewhere. This also is asymmetric left to right, but it's hard to notice at first. When we turn this piece sideways, it looks pretty similar on both sides, but if you look in this area right here, just in this corner, and you check on each side, you'll notice a little bit of plastic is missing. And in fact, the shapes are slightly different. This is an intentional change. I don't know what the reason for it is, but I admire. Usually, I'm not the type of person who likes asymmetry for no reason, mostly because it can limit the use of certain parts. But this is a detail asymmetry, and it's kind of charming because it's something that so easily goes unnoticed. And this shows up time and time again across Bionicle, across Lego in general. And so when I find little things like this, I always find it fascinating. Now, the reason I wanted to show you the Baraki and Mahri armor pieces at the start of this video is because when I talk about the project that I'm working on, the Glatorian expansion, if you will, the Bara Magna expansion, whatever you want to call it, eventually I'll come up with an official name for it. But when I think about that, I think to myself, you know, Bionicle is an interesting thing, right? It introduces a lot of new pieces in different waves. An example of that, obviously, is that new Mahri armor, right? This is two separate molds, two separate pieces. The budgeting for this is different. Now, granted, these are probably molded in the same process at the same time, very likely a part of a sprue, if nothing else, but I still find it so fascinating that LEGO was willing to do something like this for a set where essentially this only shows up, I think, 3 times in Bionicle in general and nowhere else. So it's a very interesting piece in general, and it's an interesting sort of case study. That's the word I'm looking for. So I think to myself, you know, if I want to take on this Glatorian Bara Magna project, challenge, expansion, whatever, I want to obey some rules. And what I've set out for myself is that each of the sets that I want to build will have their own exclusive masks and weapons, although I'm willing to make exceptions in some cases, right? Very clearly, you know, not every 2009 set had a unique weapon. Vorox, Zesk, Metis all use the same sword piece over and over again, and that's to allow LEGO to give that parts budget to something else. Ranu, who has that red shield piece, those pieces are actually introduced in Exoforce, of all things, first, and then come over to Bionicle for that color specifically. And so I find this really fascinating, but it means that wherever I can look to the past, look to Bionicle for inspiration, I want to do so. 2007 is an interesting year in Bionicle because it introduces so many new parts. It is really an all-in year when you think about it. Each of the Baraki sets not only has a unique helmet or mask, face, whatever you want to call it, but also has unique weapons, mandibles that are included, and not to mention that, but several of them have their own unique armor pieces that oftentimes don't even reappear again. And so I find it quite interesting because 2007 is a year that a lot of people look to for inspiration, as I mentioned, and sort of hold in high regard. And I think there's a good reason for that. It is a really, honestly, masterclass in balancing new parts, unique builds, and also that theme, that underwater motif, right? None of the sets scream, hey, look at me, I am a squid, but you know that that's what the character is going for, right? And so that's kind of what I'm going for here as well. I want to design these pieces so that they don't just say, hey, I'm only able to be used for this one thing, but when they are used for that one reason, I want them to shine, right? So part of my idea, part of this thought, part of this experiment in general is not just an expansion of what Bionicle is, but it is treating it as though it never ended, right? And so it's not just going to be introducing new helmets, new weapons, new building schemes, you know, like having characters with custom torsos and things, but also balancing all of this with the idea that, you know, Bionicle sets are still Inika builds for a reason, right? That it's a build that works as repetitive as it may get, but it's also a budget constraint, right? You look at the second half of 2009, the Glatorian Legend sets, they actually use the same feet pieces as the Inika feet. There's no new foot mold introduced for that wave at all. And it's because they didn't need to. You know, nobody pays attention to that. But 2007 introduces what, like 4 new feet pieces? Something like that. I could be wrong, honestly. But so it's fascinating to me. So that's honestly the main thing I want to focus on, is sort of taking these ideas, taking these aspirations from what LEGO laid out for us, from what Bionicle had laid out for us, and sort of working within those constraints, but not being afraid to experiment. This is why one important thing to mention is I'm not limiting myself to 2010 era Technic pieces, because I consider Technic and Bionicle kind of two different things. Yes, they are synonymous and they do belong together, but several pieces have been introduced in Technic that revolutionize it from where it was back in 2008. And to limit myself from those pieces, although definitely possible, it's not necessary, you know? Just like, you know, taking a piece like the Uniter armor, for example, it's not necessary to limit myself from using that, right? It's an excellent piece, an excellent design, and it goes exactly in the direction I want to go for. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. If you guys did enjoy this video, I will see y'all in the next one. Make sure you are subscribed, and as always, you can check out my links for Discord, Instagram, and Patreon in the description below so you can support the channel, get some perks. I gotta go. I'll see you later. Take care.